All right, so thanks for coming out, everybody. This is our second to last tour of the year, which I can't believe it went really fast. And everybody's saying it, so it's not just me. And we've got great weather, so we should have a good time. Thanks for bringing your dogs out. It's nice to see that. And that's about it.
Wait, Matt.
That's about
Matt.
it. So, yeah.
Your boy.
Oh, all right. So we have Danny carrying the colors today.
Yeah!
And Dan, you're going to make it the whole time, right? You're not going to give up?
He just wanted an introduction. He didn't say all that. He just wanted his name out there.
All right, so today, as you can see, we've all got booklets in our hand because we have a special guest joining us. Lewis invited Pete Carmichael to come along, and I guess what, you want him to like do the heavy lifting, and you're just kind of taking it easy today?
That's why I'm starting here, so I can sit down for a while. I won't be as tired when I go home today.
Yeah, no, they're going to kind of tag team it today, and I don't know what they've got planned, and that'll be fun. We'll get to see it, and it'll be something a little different for us. And well, that's about it. So I'd like to introduce Lewis Trott and Pete Carmichael. Thanks for coming out.
Really quickly, it's utterly superficial. So hey, it's nice meeting you all. Again, I'm Pete Carmichael. I just teach over yonder here in Gettysburg College. College was nice enough to put these booklets together for you, and we have some programs coming up we'd love for you all to attend. But this is really why I'm talking now. I look utterly ridiculous with this scarf, and if you're not listening right to Matt's show, Matt is always making a point about scarves, which I do have a fondness for. And he insisted that I wear one, and I was like, I'm going to look ridiculous. But he shamed me into doing it. So if you're thinking, I don't really know Pete Carmichael, and what kind of idiot academic in the middle of the summer, right, would be wearing a scarf? I'm wearing it because, again, Matt bullied me in doing so. So I just want to get that out there. Another thing I say, Lewis and I, man, we worked together 2 years ago at a Civil War Institute summer conference. We did the 18th Virginia. It was a lot of fun. We've gone on the battlefield. I've learned, as you all have learned, a great deal from him. I'm just kind of along for the ride. I am the barnacle to your ship today, man. but some things to talk about, I'll have some questions, maybe to ask of Lewis as well. But I really appreciate the opportunity. I had dinner with some academics last night, and you can only imagine how tedious that was. I did say to them, though, I was going to be doing this today. What a blessing it is for me. One, I came here when I was a kid from Indiana when I was 7. Now to be able to teach at Gettysburg College, which I absolutely love, and I have fantastic students. And then above all else, man, to have this place, we have this place, this classroom, to be able to have a conversation with all my fellow Civil War historians, man, I'm damn lucky. I don't think the folks in philosophy or biology here at Gettysburg College have a group, popular audience in which they can have these kinds of engagements. So I'm really looking forward today, looking forward to meeting you all, looking forward to the after party. Lewis, really, that was a big selling point for this. After party at the Farnsworth house. All right, so again, scarf, I want everyone to know when you're taking pictures of me, I should take it off. This is all of Matt's doing. Where did he even go? Oh, there he is. He's over there. Oh.
If this is a boat we're on today, let's hope it's not the SS Minnow. We're crashing. So, as always, I have to thank Matt for allowing me to do this. If he decided to go another direction, there are plenty of smarter guides out there that would line up for the opportunity to come out here and talk to y'all one Saturday a month during the summertime. So I appreciate him allowing me to do this. I have to thank Ashley as always. She puts up with me. She comes out here. She's not a big Civil War fan, but she tolerates me. Some of us have been married and divorced twice. And we finally learned to recognize and not take stuff for granted. So I appreciate Ashley coming out here.
Yay, Ashley!
And she has her scarf on because she's from Indiana also.
That's just a fellow Hoosier.
Yeah.
A fellow Hoosier.
I have to say, when Matt started the podcast, I initially contacted him just to email to say, I think what you're doing is pretty good, and it was early on. And I sensed that he was getting grief from other areas, and I said, this is pretty good. I like it. I'm a licensed battlefield guide, so for whatever that's worth, You know, I'm part of this growing community. And I hadn't been a guide that long, but I sensed that he was getting grief from other people thinking they're, you know, high and mighty above him, and, you know, he's just a guy starting a podcast. But he shared with me, I don't know if it was the first interview he did, it was one of the first, and he shared it with me before he put it out, and I had never heard of Patreon or any of that mess. But it was the interview with Pete promoting his book, War for the Common Soldier. And when I started my historical journey, it started with World War II. I love World War II, and I still do, but it was always about the higher-ups. It was Eisenhower, and Rommel, Guderian, Manstein, Nimitz, Curtis LeMay. It wasn't down on the lower levels. It's always a couple levels at the top, and that's what generally people study, and then they study these big battles. But Pete brought it home to the common soldier. For 21 years, that's what I was. I was just a common gun bunny, you know, in the Army. I wasn't up at these higher levels, and I'm proud of what I did. I love what I did. I love the Army. But I didn't want to study what I had done. I'm just a normal guy out there doing what I'm told, and that's what Pete's writing about to a point. But once he wrote that book, and I read that book, and I listened to that interview, that opened my eyes to another layer of the history out here in Gettysburg. It's more than Meade. It's more than Hancock. It's more than Lee. It's more than Ewell and all those commanders. It's the guys down here doing the fighting and the dying on the ground that these higher-ups are planning for. And that really opened my eyes to all this. And that's when I started studying deeper, because you don't necessarily have to know all this to become a guide. You got to come out here and give a 2-hour story. When you come out here and give a 2-hour story, you're not talking about Lieutenant Rush Caddy. You mention his name on the test, you're going to flunk. I guarantee it. Don't go into the weeds if you want to take the test. The person grading you doesn't wear bug spray. If you get into the weeds, you're going to flunk. So you don't need to know all this stuff, but that's what makes it interesting. It is the common soldier. And once he let me listen to that before he put it out, I said, I'm all in. And I wasn't the first guide in, because Bob Steenstra was the first guide in. And I miss Bob hearing his calming voice. He's very, very calm and very logical. I'm not always like that. And I miss hearing him. I especially miss Eric. If anybody knows Eric, tell Eric, the producer, I really miss him. He's a good guy. He's a fellow soldier. So with that, I was lucky enough, as Pete mentioned 2 years ago, because the Park Service made them drag some guides with them on their tours. I got lucky and hooked up with Pete's tour. It was just me and him out there. We had a blast.
Yeah, it was great.
I was very honored and humbled this past summer when Ashley, not my Ashley, but Ashley Lusky reached out to me and said, hey, you want to do a tour for this year's seminar? I said, can't believe you're asking me. But yeah, I'm all in. It happens to be that I did O'Neill's Brigade. And then they've asked me to do one for this upcoming year. You can go on the website and see what that's about, because that's the registration's open for that.
Remember who was on your O'Neill tour at CWI? But my daughter, I got twin daughters. Isabel was on your tour. She came back and she said, she talked about the terrain, she talked about, she didn't say O'Neill, but she said how these guys were separated from Iverson's brigade. She had listened and learned, and you can only imagine how that made me feel. Envious as hell, man. She doesn't listen to me at all. I'm serious. I was like, damn, you don't listen to me. You know how kids are.
And I didn't realize till about halfway the tour that was his daughter. She showed up. You got to have somebody from the college. And I said, well, this is a young college student. And I said, well, what year of college you in? She said, well, I'm a senior at high school. High school. Oh, she says, my dad works here. I was like, oh, so you're the hired help and you don't have to get paid. I didn't know.
Get paid.
And so we're up there talking, and somebody whispers to me, do you know that's Pete Carmichael's daughter? Yeah. I don't know.
I was impressed.
I'm not going to say anything offensive out here if that's what you're getting at.
And then my other daughter was on Carol Reardon's tour, and she came back raving about Reardon. And man, I got a fragile ego. I'm a man. Like, come on, what's going on here? And so my daughter's favorite historian in Gettysburg, it's not like Scott Hartwig. It's certainly not me. It's Barb Sanders. Do you all know who Barb Sanders is? She works at the park. She does their educational outreach. She's brilliant at it. But there's her favorite Civil War story. You might be second.
All right. We did get to the end, and I got a little choked up, and I looked at her as we were walking back to the bus. Don't you tell your daddy I was out here crying. So, with that, we'll start our tour. Today, we are doing Robinsons Division. For those of you going to next week's association tours out here all weekend, I apologize. I picked this first. I plan stuff out based on the weather, what I think it's going to be, whether we're going to be standing in the hot sun in July and August, and where on the field I can accomplish it by what they're growing out here, where the crops are going to be. So I had no idea they're doing what they're doing next week. But our Robinson tour is going to be a little bit different, because in the course of this, and I started planning this tour back in June. I had the thought last year at this time, like I've already sent them my thoughts for next year. And I thought it was just a carry-on, because we've done Iverson and O'Neill, and then earlier this, for those of you that made it, you will always remember our Daniels Brigade, because we got caught in the thunderstorm. We tackled those two brigades, and I thought, as I was planning those tours, I thought we need to do what they're up against, and that's Robinsons Division. But along the way, I started getting this thought, and it's not an original thought because I don't have those, that maybe things aren't what the prevailing narrative actually are. The prevailing narrative is Rhodes arrived on the Oak Hill over there with his division. He has two brigades that he's bringing in on line to his front, or facing this way, south. That is Iverson on the right, O'Neill on his left. He sees Robinson's men extending Cutler's line over here. He sees Howard's 2 division coming out to the plain out here behind you. He thinks he's going to be attacked. So he wants to send these 2 brigades forward, and he wants them to go at the same time. But there's problems, and the prevailing narrative is O'Neill goes first, O'Neill gets repulsed, then Iverson goes forward. Iverson's men get slaughtered out there in the field. They regroup, and the rest of the battle goes on. I started reading more into it, and if you've ever read the book July 1st at Gettysburg by David Martin, it's a very good book. I like it a lot, but there's a sentence in there when they're talking about this action here, and it made me really think, and I'm paraphrasing the sentence, and the sentence is, nobody really knows what happened. And I said, you know, that's the phrase they use for the wheat fields. And I said, well, why don't people know what happened up here? Everybody's got an OR, and everybody's telling the story to their parents back home and whatnot, and writing newspapers trying to put their story out there. So it's known, and people are writing about it. But what's the confusing part? And then I started talking with Pete. We'd come out here in July and wandered around and really started wondering who attacks first. Does O'Neill attack first, or does Iverson actually attack first? So my thoughts were, and I've been guiding for 7 years now. When I tell this story up here, I'm standing up here looking down here, and I say, these men over here go first, they get pushed back, then these men go, they get pushed back, and that 130 attack by Rhodes 2 brigades fails. Tomorrow when I give a bike tour, I'll be way over there. We can't see the hill, but I'm still going to talk about it. I'm going to say, these men go first, they get pushed back, and these men go first, get pushed back, because you don't get in the weeds on a simple tour. Nobody's been here, and they're not looking at the in-depth stuff. So today's tour is predicated on who attacks first. And I'm more and more coming to the conclusion that it's Iverson's men that actually attack first and get pushed back. And O'Neill's men don't really do a lot until Ramseur comes on board. Ramseur's 2 regiments split, 2 of them over here, 2 of them over here, and they're supporting both the remnants of Iverson, and they're supporting O'Neill's brigade as they come forward. By then, you've got Early coming in on Howard's flank, and the Union line's crumbling. So,
Louis, do you mind getting them on page 3 and situating them? Because I think they could see that as well.
We've got maps in here.
Yeah.
So page 3 is the first map.
And yeah, this one is actually from the Savage, from Brad's book as well. Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Anybody else need any maps here? I got plenty.
And I carry the Liano maps. That's the only map I use out here. They're very detailed. I like them.
Right. Did you want to use this so they can know where they are? Oh, you got one. Okay. Yeah.
And even, you know, last month I said there's a problem with Fonz's books. I'm not the guy to say that. I'm not too well known. I'm not known at all, except, you know, you lucky fools. But I'm not on that level. I don't have that stature. But when there's problems, and I'm going to be honest about it. And if I come out here and say something that's erroneous, I expect somebody to call me out too. Sometimes there's problems, I think, with Liano's maps, and I'll get to that in a minute. And that's not to discount that atlas. I'll be using it next month again, and I always use it. So to start then, let's talk about what the Confederates, first let's talk about Robinson's, very briefly, his division. So Robinson is born in 1817. You do the math and figure out how old he is. This is not a math class and it's overrated anyways. He's from Bingham, New York. He does go to West Point. He enters West Point in 1835. He's supposed to graduate in 1839. He makes it to 1838 though, and he gets expelled for insubordination. But instead of going on in life and doing something totally different, he does go into the military. He enlists in the military as an officer, and he makes his way up through the ranks. So he is a regular Army officer who's been in the Army at the onset of the Civil War, so he has experience. He starts off the war as a colonel of the 1st Michigan Infantry Regiment, and of course he's going to be the division commander here at Gettysburg, and he has these 2 brigades. The 2 brigades, 1st Brigade is under Gabriel Paul. Well, let me finish out him first because I'll forget it at the end. He fights through the war at the Battle of Laurel Hill in 1864. He gets wounded below the knee, I think it is. He has part of his leg amputated, so his military career ends at that point. Later on, though, he is awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions at Laurel Hill. So John Cleveland Robinson is a Medal of Honor winner. His statue's right over here. I believe it was Lieutenant Abner Spall, the adjutant of the 16th Maine, who said, in a very bearded army, John Robinson was the hairiest man he ever saw. Because his beard is down to here. He spent a lifetime growing that thing.
And the sculptor got it, right?
Yeah, it's kind of hard. You got to get up to it. But
the sculptor didn't have to.
He is going to die in 1897, 79 years old, so he lives a pretty full life. Gabriel Paul, he is the 1st Brigade commander of Robinson's Division. He was born in 1913. He is a graduate of West Point, graduated in 1834. So he is a military man. He stays in the military, goes out west, he fights Indians. But like you probably read, rank is hard to come by in the pre-war Army. Nobody's dying really, or not enough people are dying for you to move up. And the Army's not that big. And so it's taken him a while to make his way up through the ranks. The war breaks out, he's a colonel. 1862, his wife gets a little antsy. She wants him to, she's wondering why he's not a brigadier general. So she goes to President Lincoln. Back then, President Lincoln had open door policy. Just like you'll never see a president drive his convertible around here like John F. Kennedy, there's never going to be an open door policy at the White House like Lincoln had. But she shows up to the White House. She's wanting to know why her husband, Colonel Paul, hasn't been promoted to brigadier general. Lincoln listens to her because he's a very patient man. After that, he remarks, and it's a quote, but I can't remember the full sentence. She's a saucy woman. Abe would get in trouble these days calling somebody a saucy woman. But he gets promoted to brigadier general. His wife doesn't really know it. But that doesn't look good. If your wife goes begging for your promotion. If any of my wives went to my 1st sergeant or my battery commander and said, hey, I need my staff sergeant husband to become a sergeant 1st class because the money's a little bit better, that's not going to sit well with me or the people around me. So at times, Paul gets a bad rap. It looks like he's been promoted because his wife is bugging the president. But he is a veteran. He's a veteran soldier. He's a good soldier. And so he's promoted on merit. It just doesn't appear that way because his wife shows up. He's going to fight for the war. Here at Gettysburg, he's going to be wounded, blinded in both eyes, and that essentially ends his active field command. He is going to live until 1886, dies at the age of 73, and he lives from 1863 to 1886 blind. So unfortunately, that happens to him. Our other character here is Henry Baxter. Out of the 3 principals we're talking about on the Union side, he is the only one that's not a professional soldier. He was in the militia back home. He was born in Sydney Plains, New York. He is part of a militia unit. And when the war breaks out, he becomes captain of Company C, 7th Michigan Infantry Regiment. He is a very brave soldier. He's wounded in 3 separate occasions before this battle. And then after this battle, he's going to be wounded down in the wilderness in 1864. Unfortunately, he only lives 10 years after this fight, and he dies at the age of 52. So his life is not nearly as long as the other two gentlemen I mentioned. So that's the Union side moving up here. When they move up here, the action over here in McPherson's Woods, Herbst Woods, has pretty much concluded. Doubleday is now in charge because Reynolds has been killed. When Robinson's division comes up, he's going to tell Robinson to send a brigade over here and to keep another brigade in reserve by the seminary. The brigade in reserve is Paul's brigade. They're the ones that are going to build that breastworks in front of the seminary that those men over there later on in the afternoon are going to fall back to and defend. Paul's brigade is the one that builds the breastworks where the parking lot is on this side of the seminary. Baxter's men are going to rush over here to extend Cutler's line, and then a little while later, Paul's men are going to be sent over here too. Now, as I mentioned, Rhodes' division has arrived up there. I'm going to read briefly from the OR so you know what his thinking is.
So, I got a question. So, we've talked about this before. So, your opinion about Doubleday's decision to send Robinson here. Again, if you look at the map that we have, you can tell that Robinson's division is on a hook. And so here's my question. Is there a preoccupation with terrain here in that this high ground here on this ridge line that of course put Robinson's division on a hook and extended and exposed? Did Doubleday make a mistake? Scarf is in one. And should they have in fact bent the line, right, to hook up more with the 11th Corps? But my point is, if you look at the map here, on the one hand, this would seem, of course, a logical place to go, and yet, on the other hand, do you think Doubleday should come under some criticism for putting Robinson right here?
I don't know. Because I don't know what Robinson knows about Howard's actions. If Howard can get out here and hook
but
up...
it wouldn't be Robinson's fault, it would be Doubleday.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Doubleday had to be aware that the 11th Corps is coming on the scene, but even if you're not aware of that, you're aware of what? You're aware that you've got Robinson here on a hook, and you're aware that what? The Confederates, Rhodes' division is coming from the north. You put these men not in an enviable position, right?
Yeah, because your right flank is exposed.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely
Howard
this, right?
can move up. The only other thing I would say is, and it goes to the end of the first day, my thinking has evolved. The Union Army wins the first day. They give up territory, but they win the first day. They hold the most important plot of land on the field, and they inflict so many casualties that it comes back, casualties that the Confederates can ill afford, it comes back to haunt them specifically on day 3.
How about if we call it a draw?
We'll call it a draw.
Let's go. Hey, well, here's one other quick thing for you to tell them about. What about the terrain here about Robinson's division? There is some, I think, debate amongst my Park Service friends. How heavily wooded was it here? So if it's heavily wooded and you've got Robinson's division here, there's one thing that maybe would be defensible and Doubleday's action, right? Because I don't think the roads from Oak Hill off to your right, I don't think he saw a lot of what was back here where you all are standing. Would you
Probably
agree?
not here. He sees Cutler, though. And that's why he gets
Sees
out his
Cutler
guns.
there,
He's
right?
firing at Cutler.
Right.
And that is a good point. That spur right down here with the railroad's not here either. The only thing that's here is the road, the Mumminsburg Road, and it looks different. You're right. I'm not sure how far the woods. I used to think they came out all the way to the road. I'm not sure of that anymore because my thoughts have went elsewhere and I haven't studied it.
But the point that
if you guys get down towards the Chambersburg Road, is that, well, between here and that cutout there, that was all wooded at that point?
What we call Sheaves Woods or Wills Woods, those were here.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you look, go to page, well, even on the map on page 3, you can see some woods. And then you flip the page to page 4, there's another map. There are woods. The historian or the soldier who wrote the 97th history, 97th New York, he constantly refers to it as a strip of woods. So that tells me it's not that big.
But if they're on the back side of this ridge line, I've thought a little bit about this now, and Rhodes is up on Oak Hill. How much can you see from Oak Hill to take in Robinson's division? And that's a question to you. How much do you think? I think a lot of Robinson's division was, in a sense, invisible to them. And you're right, their attention is, you don't think so?
I think they know they're here. And we'll get to that because they don't come up and immediately line up here.
No, they're down there.
No, they're out here, facing this way.
Right, okay.
The 97th and 11th are in that field,
Right.
facing there, and their skirmishers are
Right.
pushing back Confederate skirmishers.
Right.
So it's only later that they move back and establish this line. So Rhodes gets here. He writes, and this is further on his report, being thus threatened from two directions, I determined to attack with my center and right, holding at bay still another force, then emerging from the town, apparently with the intention of turning my left. Let's see, talks about those. While making some examination into this position and apparent intentions of the enemy with the view of attacking him, this artillery fire became so annoying, it's Union artillery firing at his men, that I ordered the Alabama Brigade from the line it had occupied to fall back abreast with Iverson, so as to obtain some little shelter for the troops. The right regiment, the 3rd Alabama, was under my order, placed on a line with Daniel's brigade, Colonel O'Neill being instructed to form the balance of his brigade upon him. And I talked about this with the CWI tour we did. I interpret that as he wants the 3rd Alabama to move up, not connect with Daniel's brigade, but to get on the same line. So they look straight to their right and they're right there. They're not behind them and they're not in front of them. Instead, the 3rd goes over and sort of connects with them. And the other part of that sentence is he tells O'Neill to form your line to the left of the 3rd. That means a straight line with your, it would be other 3 because Rhodes is holding the 5th Alabama back. It'd be the 6th, 12th, and 26th Alabama. Have one solid line. O'Neill doesn't do that. The worst commander out here for the Confederates is O'Neill. I'm pretty sure of that. So that's a talk for another day, though. These dispositions were but temporary and unimportant and are mentioned only because they are necessary to a full understanding of Colonel O'Neill's report, which is a mess. Finding that the enemy was rash enough to come out from the woods to attack me, I determined to meet him when he got to the foot of the hill I occupied, and he did so. I caused Iverson's brigade to advance, and at the same moment gave in person to O'Neill the order to attack, indicating to him precisely the point to which he was to direct the left of his 4 regiments then under his orders. The 5th Alabama, which formed the extreme left of his brigade, being held in reserve under my own immediate command to defend the gap between O'Neill and Doles. So he has sent a message to Iverson's brigade to attack. He is personally telling O'Neill to attack with your 4 regiments. That includes the 3rd. O'Neill abdicates his leadership on this day. The next time Rhodes runs into him, he's without his horse, and he's like, what are you doing? He's like, well, we don't have any horses. I don't know what happens to his horses, but he's a horrible guy out here. So he is not leading his men forward. Word has been sent to Iverson. Iverson's men come forward. He doesn't necessarily lead them, and we know he doesn't put skirmishers out. That's another story. But they've been told to go forward, and they go forward. And then jumping ahead, I don't want to spend too much on Rhodes or any of the Confederates because this is primarily what's going on with the Union up here. O'Neill writes, while lying here and awaiting orders to advance, his men experienced shell fire. They moved back to the woods. He writes, the 3rd Alabama on the right of the brigade was ordered by General Rhodes to connect with the brigade of General Daniel on my right, and the 5th Alabama on the left. General Rhodes said he would command in person, so that I only moved forward with the 12th, 26th, and 6th Alabama regiments. Why my brigade was thus deprived of 2 regiments, I have never been informed. We were compelled to fall back as the regiment on the extreme left, being flanked by a superior force of the enemy, gave way. It was impossible to hold the position we had gained as the enemy had advanced in numbers and position. At some point in here, he writes they were engaged for approximately 30 minutes. They're not engaged for 30 minutes. They get knocked back pretty. If we go by the scenario that O'Neill attacks first, they get knocked back pretty quickly. That's the only way would allow the Union men to then focus their attention to Iverson's men. So it's not brief at all, and I don't think they come forward. And I'll give you my evidence, and you can think which one at the end.
Lewis, could you just real quickly, for me as well, help visualize what we would have seen of Rhodes' division with Doles. And so could you sort of point out the terrain here so we can imagine what that would have
We've
looked
got
like?
the McLean further up here.
So Doles would have been directly in front of
Doles
us.
is further over there.
So that's the far left of Rhodes.
The next road over is Doles Georgians.
Right.
That's why he's pulled the 5th Alabama back. Doles' men are sort of facing this way, and then you've got his O'Neill's brigade. They're faced sort of this way. You've also got Eugene Blackford's sharpshooters down here trying to connect, and he's using the 5th to try to connect the left of O'Neill with Doles, but they're not all facing the same way. So here's the other question. I'm not going to get into it today. It's a story for another time. But where is O'Neill's brigade? I had always assumed from the top of the hill, as we're looking at it to the right, down the slope, they're back there in that tree line. If you look at Liano's map, how does Lano, do I always say it wrong? Yeah, I'm a goober. Not so much the Godfrey map, but on the Lano map, those 3 regiments that O'Neill attacks with are on the hill. And I've seen maps where their right is connected with the Mummersburg Road. And they're actually not coming this way, they're moving this way. So, but that's another question. I didn't prepare for all that. It's just something to take into consideration.
But what's great for them to be able to see, and they can see it better than us, you can almost see the entire divisional front for Rhodes.
Well, you can't see Iverson.
Almost.
Well, that ground
down there,
slopes.
they can see it.
That ground slopes over there.
Right.
The ground it's just like when you look across the field. When you get out of the field and look back here, it looks like you're really going up a hill. When you stand here and look that way, it looks like it dips down a little bit, it's fairly flat.
I'll just make a quick point about Rhodes. We don't have to get in depth about it, but Robert Rhodes comes under a lot of criticism, not just for July 1, but July 2nd as well. I think some of the things we'll talk about might cause a reevaluation of Rhodes on the 1st, but I'll say this. What happened here is one of the great disasters in the Army of Northern Virginia, not just at Gettysburg, but throughout the war. I mean, what's next is probably Bristow Station, right? In terms of a Confederate attack that was just botched and mismanaged. But I'll make this point. The aggressiveness that you see here on July 1st borders on recklessness, but do you all understand that that's what made the A&V, Army of Northern Virginia, so successful? They understood that on the ground that if you were aggressive, if it didn't work out, yes, you had to answer for it, but what you didn't have to do, as you had to in the Army of the Potomac, is probably go where? You might end up before the Committee on the Conduct of War. That conservatism that we sometimes find in the Army of the Potomac throughout its history, it's in part because of the political repercussions that they have to answer for in D.C. Is there a Committee on the Conduct of War in Richmond? No. And R.E. Lee, right, if he, for whatever reason, thought that you weren't doing the job, he was the greatest of diplomats. He would bring you into his tent and say, what? Your services are so valuable to us that we got to send you out to the Trans-Mississippi. That's the lead way, right? And again, what's fascinating to me are 2 things. One, that Iverson has his job even after this, which surprises me. But above all else, you know, people go after Rhodes here. He's by far the best divisional commander, I think, in the Army of Northern Virginia, better than even Hood. And I think, again, he stuck around, he did well, and July 2nd is a mystery to me, and that's, of course, obviously another day. But I think, again, in this disaster, I believe you see why the Army of Northern Virginia was so formidable on the battlefield and why they were so aggressive. If you made a decision, maybe it didn't work out well, but if it was aggressive, you knew that the man up top, R.E. Lee, was going to approve of it.
And the other thing is happenstance. If Rhodes arrives with Doles and Ramsey in front, and not Iverson and O'Neill,
That's a different story.
it's how they arrive. Ramsey's bringing up the real. And this is the first time Daniel's brigade is operating with this army. They were brought on board for this campaign. But we see what the job he does. He's a fighter over here. And he just, even in his report, Rhodes writes, he refers to the Alabama brigade as Rhodes Brigade. And then in parentheses, it's O'Neill. That's his old brigade. That's why he's staying with them. He cares about those men, but he's sort of micromanaging them a little bit too much. Now he's stuck with, in my opinion, the worst brigade commander they got out here. I think, and I don't know if I've mentioned this, I think Iverson is gun shy. Iverson gets high praise earlier in the war for leading his troops, being out front, and he gets wounded. And he says, I'm not doing that again. And he's gun shy because later in the war, he transfers to the cavalry. He does a pretty good job. Just, he doesn't do the good job here that he needs to do at the time. That's another story. We can do this all day. Y'all got 8 hours? All right, on to Robinsons and his OR. Arriving on the field was placed by order of the Major General commanding of the 1st Corps, that is Abner Doubleday by this point, in reserve near the seminary. Almost immediately after taking this position, I received notice that the enemy was advancing in heavy column of infantry on the right of our line of battle. When I sent the 2nd Brigade under Brigadier General Baxter to meet it, orders being received at this time to hold the seminary, the 1st Brigade under Brigadier General Paul was set to work to entrench on the ridge on which it was situated. I then rode to the right of the line to superintend the operations there. On my arrival, I found my 2nd Brigade so placed as to cover our right flank, but with too great an interval between it and the line of the 1st Division. He's talking about Cutler. I at once directed General Baxter to change front forward to on his left battalion. He's moved out here. He's ordering Baxter to change front on his left battalion. So they go from facing north to facing west. And to close this interval with Cutler, toward which the enemy was making his way. By the time this change was effected, the whole front of the brigade became hotly engaged, but succeeded in repulsing the attack. The front of the brigade is facing this way. It's not facing this way. The whole front facing this way is engaged. Who are they engaged with? For the most part, it's Iverson. By now, you might have Daniels coming in on their left flank, offering some firepower. The enemy, however, soon brought up fresh troops in increased masses. When finding the position so seriously threatened, I sent for and brought up the 1st Brigade and placed part of it in the position first occupied by Baxter's brigade, and then the remaining battalions as support to his 2nd position. The enemy now made repeated attacks on the division, in all of which he was handsomely repulsed with the loss of 3 flags and about 1,000 prisoners. It says the division held its position on the right, receiving and repelling the fierce attacks of a greatly superior force, not only in front, but on the flank. And when the enemy's ranks were broken and charging upon him and capturing his colors and men, from about noon until nearly 5 p.m. when I received orders to withdraw. This doesn't have anything to do with today's story, but this was written July 18th, 1863. In time, General Meade gathers up all the reports. He puts out his overall reports about the conduct of the Army of the Potomac. Robinson reads that, and November 15th, 1863, Robinson is going to write to General Meade. General Meade, I feel it my duty to inform you of the intense mortification and disappointment felt by my division in reading your report on the Battle of Gettysburg. For nearly 4 hours on July 1st, we were hotly engaged against overwhelming numbers, repulsed repeated attacks of the enemy, captured 3 flags and a very large number of prisoners, and were the last to leave the field. We have been proud of our efforts on that day and hope they would be recognized. It is but natural we should feel disappointed that we are not once referred to in the report of the commanding general. He's kind of bitter his men didn't get some praise out of this fight. And that's what's sort of amusing to me. They are very aware of who is saying what about them, both in print and verbally, in newspapers back home. And if there's any slight to either the regiment, the brigade, or the division they're in, they're going to call it out. And in the words of, I forget his name over here, the Confederate that starts everything, the boys got their dander up. And they write these letters and stuff, so it's pretty funny.
I'll just say real quickly about, I'm sure Baxter's brigade did Duryea command it before? I'm pretty sure he did. Yeah. So Duryea's brigade, you know what they did at Antietam? They're the 1st brigade to go through the cornfield. They didn't actually fight in the cornfield, as you all probably know. They actually emerged from the cornfield And so it's Duryea's brigade, it's the only one of that division that made that initial attack. So when you think about these federal soldiers here and what they're accustomed to do, they're accustomed to doing the attacking. It's not just here, or at Antietam, excuse me, not just at Antietam, but also at Fredericksburg. They're part of Meade's assault on the Confederate right flank. They're doing the attacking. At Chancellorsville, they get lightly engaged. And so you can only imagine for these men to have the great advantage that they did. And we could talk, I guess, about the stone walls. As we all know, people love to debate everything here about where these stone walls were placed. Some people think that the wall was back here. I don't see other. I mean, there could have been a wall, but just think about it where you all are standing right now. You're on the back side of the ridge. We might disagree a little bit about this, but the 97th New York and Baxter's men, they're back here. They're hunkered down. Their skirmishers come back, and then they come up over the ridge line and get right behind that stone wall right in the nick of time. You know, again, there are all kinds of varying accounts. I'd always imagined that these Federals were hunkered down behind that wall waiting for the assault. I think it was more at the last moment they emerged from this little depression here. They got the cover of the trees, they got the cover of the rock wall. And of course, these guys didn't attack, remember, Maurice Heights, but talk about a reversal of fortune here, right, for the Federals. So this is something that's very different. The power of the defense, we all know what attackers need to have 3-to-1 odds in the Civil War. And then the last thing to be said as we come up and we look at these attacks and think about these men and these linear formations that they use, shoulder to shoulder, 2 ranks deep. They did it for what reason? Not because they were wedded to some Napoleonic tactics. This wasn't out of romance. It was out of necessity. It's the technology. If you can fire that gun at most 3 times a minute, you got to concentrate firepower, right? Concentrate firepower by only doing what? Shoulder to shoulder, 2 ranks deep. Almost insurmountable on the defense. Certainly there's some problems when you're doing the attacking. Visualizing Civil War tactics, why men did what they did, helps us appreciate it in a more realistic way, that they weren't just of some golden age and they were more courageous than us, and look how they charged and they didn't even seek cover. They didn't seek cover because of the weaponry. It absolutely demanded it. And we see here, again, I can't think of this is some hyperbole, I'm going to give it to you. Find a more destructive volley in the history of the Civil War than those initial volleys that was delivered from this wall at Iverson's brigade. Find it. One volley. Find it. You'd be hard pressed, right?
Yeah.
Can you think of any other place in the war? Now, my knowledge of the West is a little weak. Maybe Franklin, but I don't know enough to even say about that. But yeah, who cares about the West, right? That's the backwater of the war. That's not you. I do care about the West. A lot. A lot.
I agree. The wall is down here somewhere. The wall is where it's at today because the road is there.
You don't think there was a wall on that side
road.
too?
Say that again.
You don't think there's a wall on the other side?
There is, but it's not that long.
Right.
And if it's there, I don't know. It comes off the Mumsburg Road though. Then there's a gap in the wall. There's another wall to the east. And it is down here. They talk about being able to stand up down here. I'm standing. Iverson's men couldn't see any of us.
There's no way they
So,
fired from back
yeah.
here. I had a student, I tried to get him to lay down in Iverson's pits to see what you could see, and he wouldn't do it. What's wrong with young people, man? This is dirty, right?
Go ahead.
I noticed there's one type of monument that's not up here on the ridge.
Yeah.
Why are there no artillery commands here on the ridge with the enemy?
Their artillery is way over there. The closest battery, maybe Stewart, where the Mary Thompson house
Right.
is.
Yeah.
And Dilber down here too.
Yeah, you've got Dilger down here, the 11th Corps.
You couldn't get guns here without them being obliterated in 2 seconds from all the guns on Carter's
Although
battalion there.
Dilger's battery forces
Yeah.
the Confederates to move their artillery off the field, so Dilger's battery is very
Did it
effective.
stop?
They're also taking the fire from Stewart's battery and the other batteries over there. Real quick, and then we're going to walk a little bit. This is a get out of the tour, walk a little bit tour. It's the report of Henry Baxter. We heard cannonading as we approached and marched as rapidly as possible, arriving at the front of battle, where the battle was raging about 11 a.m. On order arriving from General Robinson commanding division before the brigade had halted to send forward 2 regiments at once. So Baxter's brigade doesn't move en masse as one whole over here. He's going to send forward 2 regiments in the beginning. The 11th Pennsylvania, led by Sally, Colonel Coulter, and the 97th New York Colonel Wheelock continued their march, moving to the front. The remaining 4 regiments were ordered forward in a very few moments and formed on the right of the 2 regiments already sent forward, which were on the right of the 1st Division, General Wadsworth. Indications being that we should be attacked on our right flank, I at once changed front by filing to the right and forming front on 1st Battalion and Division of the 11th Corps, being on our right at least 400 yards. I immediately sent skirmishers forward, but the enemy now appearing on our left flank, the right flank, the left flank, I had again to change front to the left and move forward to the crest of the hill up here, bringing us before the enemy when the brigade opened on advancing foes a most deadly fire, soon causing them to recoil and give way. Another line immediately took the place of that repulsed, and at this time they appeared on our right flank, making it necessary for the 90th Pennsylvania Volunteer Regiment, Colonel Lyle, to change front to meet them, which they did in perfect order, repulsing, meanwhile, a very severe fire. Baxter brings the 11th 97th up. We'll talk about where their initial spot is because it's over there in the field. And then he realizes he's bringing his other regiments up here. He needs to extend the line because he senses a threat from over here on the right flank. So he extends the line. He turns some of these men. But before they engage them, what does he say? They are met by an attack out here that they repulse handsomely. And once that attack's done, then an attack comes from the right flank. When he says he changes front to the right, he doesn't say they ever get attacked. The first attack that he talks about is coming from his left, and that's out here in this field. That's Iverson's men. The only other thing it could be, if you include O'Neill, is O'Neill's men are further to the left of Oak Hill, and their right is connected with the Mumminsburg Road. And they're coming forward with Iverson. There's not really any evidence to suggest that they move forward with Iverson. If there's a competent brigade commander up there and they move at the same time, they're going to push Baxter's men off of this ridge, and everything's going to go south faster than it does. And then you might have a different battle.
But Lewis, I'd say, yeah, competent brigade commander, divisional commander, but that's what's great about always being on the ground. And it's correct, we can't really see much of Iverson. I'd say you see just a little bit possibly. But look at this divisional front. How would you like to have management and control of that, right? And bring unity of purpose to that front. And again, as you pointed out, and as my daughter reminded me about Oak Hill itself as disrupting not just line of sight, but communication. I mean, all of this should give us what I'd say is empathy for what Civil War commanders are up against. Those maps, of course, give us a degree of clarity. It's an after-action report. We see coordination and possibilities that were not imaginable in that moment. And then you take, again, just the line of sight and how you bring that degree of unity is, again, almost incomprehensible to me. So, again, we're often hard on these guys for not doing what we think they should have been able to accomplish. And Lewis, I'm not saying that you're suggesting that, but that's why it's good to be out here, because no map can do this for us, right? No map. Look what Rhodes was up against. It's pretty phenomenal they did what they were able to do, right? I just one last thing. I've always loved to look behind the lines, and if you look off to our left here and to the left of the Robinson Monument, I think, man, Lewis, again, we need to chat some more. I think the right part of the 97th is out here, maybe 2 companies, but not much. But it's clear from what others have written is that at least for a part of the time, they're on the backside of this ridge line. And just to imagine what was going through the minds of these men who, again, had been in other battles, I get their thoughts probably ranged all over the place. But the fear, the dread that they had right before a fight, and just again, that part of the battlefield. We all look at Iverson's as we should. But then and then the other thing that we should remind ourselves of is we've been able to see all the way, which would have been Penn Hall of Pennsylvania College, now Gettysburg College. You can only imagine, you know, you've got a sort of steady stream of walking wounded heading back to the campus. You got men who are healthy and able, but what are they trying to do? See it on every fight. Get themselves out of it by helping, assisting a wounded comrade off the field. Not supposed to do it, but that's what you should imagine on those ball fields there. It's always important to bring both together, right? Point of attack and also what's happening behind the lines as well. Again, Payne Hall, if you've not seen it, you all think I'm promoting Gettysburg College here. Well, I am actually. Because you should go and visit. The epicenter of campus is this beautiful wartime building under the field hospital. You unfortunately, you can't see it because of all the modern construction and the trees. But, you know, if you get a moment, walk on campus, you'll see it. Man, it's a beautiful building. And it would have been a beacon, and I mean it, a beacon. My students, they're like, yeah, so no, where's the battlefield? Around here, right? I said, listen, you know, Civil War soldiers didn't have respect for higher ed and say, you know what, we're not going to shoot at each other on campus. Let's go around campus, boys. I said, you're on the battlefield, like it's right here. Men shot and they died right on those fields. And I got a few Gettysburg students here that I've seen and some alums. Let me tell you something, man. Going and teaching young people here is just it's a delight. Don't give up on young people. There are a lot of them that love history, love the Civil War. They care about this place, and that's why they come here. You should all feel good about what the future holds for what we care so deeply about. There are a lot of people out there. They're going to stand in what we're doing right here. There'll be a lot of really good battlefield license guys. They're in the pipeline right now.
Tell your kids math is overrated. All right, let's do this carefully. We are going to move from here down the road. We are going to go to the 97th Regimental Monument, and we'll go to the right side of the road, out there in that little grass out there. Be careful. There's actually traffic going by here that's not included in the tour. I don't know what's wrong with those people, why they didn't show up today. They're driving past us, but be mindful of the traffic and please don't block any traffic. So we're going that way to the 97th, and then we'll go to the right of it, out into...
All right, that's good. Don't kill anybody. Good job.
Thanks, Matty boy.
You're welcome.
Because I know you have people that would say, yeah,
I'll do that.
yeah.
You're over it.
One more time, just don't whack anybody in the head. Go ahead.
And cut some trails.
Good for him.
One more, Dan.
Good for him, he's right. Yeah, absolutely. Like an Antietam.
All right. So like we read in Baxter's report, when he's ordered over here, he's going to send forth 2 regiments in the beginning. That's the 11th Pennsylvania and the 97th New York. This is from Colonel Charles Wheelock, 97th New York. At 1 p.m. the same day, talking about July 1st, an immediately formed front of battle north of town on the flat, our line being parallel with the railroad. He's moved out here. We soon changed front and took position on the crest of a hill between the railroad and the road north of the town, about 3/4 of a mile from the town. When he talks about the crest of a hill, he's talking about this ridge. He's calling this a hill. And you can see here how the dynamics of your view have changed. You can see a lot more out here. I immediately sent out companies A and F as skirmishers, and within 30 yards of our front, receiving the enemy's fire, finding it proceeding from a stone wall in the embankment of the road, our skirmishers soon drove them from their position, but they soon returned with a full force, our skirmishers falling back to our line of battle, which was a strong one. Our whole line became engaged and the enemy fell back out of sight. Soon their second line appeared on our front after firing several rounds and finding them, as I thought, crippled, and order was given to charge. The 97th New York succeeded in charging over the ground without having any killed and but few wounded. We brought out as prisoners 213 officers and men of the 20th North Carolina Regiment with their colors. Now, if you look in the
Wait,
handbook...
can you help me understand one thing? So you said fire coming from the embankment of the road, referring to Confederate fire, right? So if we all look off, there's obviously the Mumminsburg Road. Is he talking about O'Neill's men in that direction, and that 2 companies of the 97th, which would be facing us, the 2 companies are out in this field facing due north? Is that what you just described? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
This is what I think happened. So go to page 4 in the handout. It's a dark looking map. This map comes from the history of the 97th, written by Captain Isaac Hall. He was the company commander, Company A. And if you see this, everything's at an angle. You see the Mumminsburg Road. Southwest of the Mumminsburg Road, you see where it says Con skirmishers. Those are Confederate skirmishers. Those are the men I think he's talking about. They could very well be, and probably are, O'Neill's men. But that's just a skirmish line. you see down further it says a fence and then it says woods.
Yeah.
And if you read that above that line, that squiggly line, it's the first position of the 11th PA and the 97th New York.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the fence or not.
That's way down there.
If that's the fence, there's another fence that used to be out here between that fence and the road. There's two fences on this map. You see high rail fence and where the first position is. When the 97th and the 11th PA move out here, they are facing this way,
Right.
along that fence,
Right.
further out in the field.
Yeah.
That's when they send skirmishers out.
Yeah.
Because they talk about their skirmishers. The 11th arrives first.
Right.
The 97th is going to send forth their skirmishers. They talk about going over the right of the 11th line to get out in the field.
Right.
They're the ones that are going to meet these Confederate skirmishers south of the Mummasburg Road. That's not a full-on attack. You figure a skirmish line's about 100 men. Even only attacking with 3 regiments, O'Neill has about 1,000 men with those 3 regiments. If he attacks with those 3 regiments at this point, it's undeniable that they'd refer to that as a big attack. And they'd be proud, rightly so, of driving them back. He's driving back a skirmish line. So O'Neill's men have yet to attack.
I got a question.
Go ahead.
How many people were here during July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd?
Ask me at the end. All right? And I'll get to that because I have to think a little bit. Once they drive them back, that's when Baxter says he realizes his men are facing to the right. That's what Baxter says in his report. Then he says he sees a threat coming from his left. He has them change front to the left. That is when the 11th Pennsylvania and the 97th New York are going to move off of that line by the fence, and they're going to fall back here. You see their monuments. Now, monuments are just an estimation of where they're at. You got the road that the War Department put in, etc. But it's undeniable that they're along this ridge. They move from this line, and they fall back because Baxter senses a threat to his left. This would have been the left. And that threat is going to materialize before there's any attack from that hill, other than these skirmishers. Is everybody with me? Anybody have any questions about that?
Good so far.
Good. If you're good, I'm good.
Me too.
Now, one of the mysteries in this battle is the 90th Pennsylvania doesn't have an official report. I don't know why. I spent an evening, and Ashley will tell you that's what I do. I get home, I immediately go get a shower because that's a time task. I get my lunch ready for the next day, and I sit down with my notebook, and I go get other books. I spent a good evening, a couple hours, looking for the 90th OR report. There is none. I think it's out there with General Pickett somewhere. But what we do have is when they came back to dedicate their monument. And their monument is the one on the corner over there. It's the nice tree. It's got some of the best flank markers. They're like little stumps, and you know I'm big into flank markers. So it's got it's got the bird up there with the cannonball. What that tells you is there's trees at that end of this line.
Yes, that's right.
And the story goes, if you get up close to there, there's a bird's nest up there with a bird, and it's feeding the little baby birds, and there's a cannonball. That nest got knocked out of the tree, and one of the soldiers stops in the midst of this big battle, picks the nest up, and puts it back up in the tree. Whether it happened or not, it doesn't matter. Kids like it, and that's all I care about. But that's where they're at. When they do dedicate their monument, so the rest of Baxter's regiments are coming up, and they're extending the line that way. You've got the 88th Pennsylvania, you've got the 90th on the end down there, the tree, and you've got the 12th Massachusetts. It's a little, the Daniel Webster Brigade. It looks like a giant bullet right there in between those two bigger monuments. When they come back and they dedicate the 90th, he was a major here at the battle, Major Alfred Sellers. He is awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions on this ridge on this day later on in life. So he's a Medal of Honor awardee. He gives one of the speeches, and he says during this dedication speech, a portion of our brigade took advantage of a stone fence which protected us from view as Iverson's North Carolinians advanced, which was about 2:30 o'clock. We delivered such a deadly volley at a very short range that death's mission was with unerring certainty, and so destructive were the volleys we rapidly delivered that we followed it up with a charge. ordered by a plucky Baxter, which resulted in the capture of 3 regiments of the brigade. That's a little overblown. This was a decisive blow, but we could not withstand the succeeding lines of battle and the inflating artillery fire from Oak Hill. Confederate Rhodes, in his report, speaks of his commands being subjected to murderous enfilade and direct infantry fire from the time it commenced in advance. So he's talked about Iverson attacking at this point. Now, the rest of it take with a grain of salt. They don't capture 3 regiments. They capture a lot of men. But Iverson has attacked. His next paragraph starts, O'Neill's troops felt confident of turning our right. The force of the attack fell upon the 90th PV, your regiment, but they were repulsed with heavy loss, and the remnants thereof hurled back. My point is, he makes it a point in his speech, X amount of years later, I think this was 1888, they dedicate that monument. He speaks of first being attacked by Iverson, and then O'Neill's men had the temerity, I shouldn't use big words, had the gumption to come out and then attack their right. So again, Iverson's first, and then O'Neill. So to me, I started reading all this stuff, and it started adding up to me. Iverson attacks first. If O'Neill sends anything out first, and there's already, Rhodes talks about he's pulled them back into the wood line over there because they're suffering from artillery fire. So instead of coming forward in the beginning, they're actually moving back. And they're suffering probably fire from the 11th Corps artillery as well, because Reese's Pieces and Page's batteries up there on that hillside. And Dilger's battery and these other 11th Corps batteries are targeting them. So now, do you want to go?
I want to say your point. So Lewis's observation, which he gave to me when we were here in July, I think he is right. The standard interpretation, O'Neill struck, then Iverson. Clearly, that first assault, as you've said, and I think again persuasively, that it's a skirmish assault from O'Neill, right? But now I want you all to take a look again. Iverson coming directly towards us across this open field. Where's O'Neill? Again, you say they struck second, but this again changes how we think about Rhodes. They hit just after Iverson gets repulsed. We all know that Iverson's attack is devoured in how many minutes? 20 minutes?
Yeah.
All right? So the idea that somehow O'Neill and Iverson could have hit at the exact same time is what? That's beyond the range of possibilities. But what's within the range of possibilities, it came awfully close to actually what? Happening. So the standard interpretation is that this is so badly mismanaged. It actually wasn't as badly mismanaged as we have maybe concluded. Clearly what Iverson did here is inexcusable. The fact that he was not with his brigade, again, inexcusable. But the fact is that Iverson and O'Neill, they struck this line almost at the same time, and we all know the degree of difficulty was what? Extraordinarily high. Extraordinarily high. I'm happy to talk about Rush here if
Go
you
ahead.
like.
Yep.
You mind holding a picture of Rush? We got two. There's
All you get that, hey Lewis, where are Iverson's pits on that side of the fence?
Iverson's Pittsburgh. If you walk out here, if you stand up on Oak Hill and look this way, you can see how the color of the field changes, and there's like a little rivet of water that runs through there. It's down in that hollow.
So they're pretty much directly in front of us.
Oh yeah. And
Directly in front of us,
We walked there
100
last
yards.
summer if you weren't here. And when you stand down here, it doesn't look like this is much of a slope. But when you stand down there and look this way, this looks like a hill. And it's fascinating to me that just these two different angles are so different, depending on which side you're standing on.
So-
But if
so-
you stand up there, you can see where that rivulet of water and the 4 big pits are in the middle of that field.
So real quickly, just go back again to page 3. No map is perfect. When I look at this map, I wish Iverson's brigade was attacking more at an oblique. So again, page 3, and we are in front of the 97th monument, which we see as Baxter, that Lewis has described, right? The monument is right there. The regimental historian said that when the attack began, that the skirmishers for the 97th came running back across this field. The regimental historian said that they were 16 to 20 yards to the east of that monument. So they're on the back side of that monument. They rush up, I believe, to again, the crest or the military crest, now taking the field here. And you can imagine that About 100 yards is where we start to get into that deep depression. The regiments on Iverson's brigade that are most exposed are on the far left because they're obliquing, right? And one of the officers, now we'll talk to the 97th here, is a young man named Rush Caddy. Lewis, if you don't mind holding that up for us. You got a picture of Rush in your booklet as well. Rush was 21, I believe, years old. I've got it right there in my notes. What did I say? 21. 21?
Yes.
He is a young man. He's from upstate New York, not far from Rome, New York. His family is extraordinarily wealthy. So wealthy that Rush, I'm not even sure he cleared the table at night, the dinner table. Like, I don't think he ever did any real work his entire life. He had, in a sense, a pampered existence, but he was a man, I discovered, who was extraordinarily dedicated in his youth. He was committed as a Christian. He was committed to his learning. He taught himself with a tutor. I shouldn't say taught himself. He had a tutor that taught him Greek and Latin. He read the classics voraciously, and in his diary, it is a journal. It did not disclose his inner thoughts, but it was a journal in which he kept tabs on his self-improvement, right? That's what he was all about. He's like Matt Calorie in many ways, right? He is a moral man. He wants to live right, and he gets his opportunity. He wanted to go to an Ivy League school. He didn't get in. I think that was probably some good luck for Mr. Rush Caddy. He instead ended up at Hamilton College. He just started Hamilton when the war broke out. He was able to join the 97th because of his uncle. And his family had some money. I suspect that was behind helping the unit come together to get organized. He was able to get a position. Rush was as a lieutenant. And I'll say this about Rush Caddy. Rush Caddy was a man who certainly had ambitions, but he was a man who, above all else, was committed to union. He believed that what had happened with the Act of Secession, that it was an immoral and illegal act. He believed that as a man of the United States that he had an obligation to do his part in crushing the rebellion. In the regiment itself, he immediately got sick for much of the war. He missed their fighting in Antietam. He arrived on the battlefield 2 days after the fight. He was escorted to the cornfield with some survivors of the 97th New York, and they gave him the most graphic account of a shell that had come into the 97th and hit a comrade, and it blew up the comrade's body, just literally exploded. And he described that the comrades who were still standing had bits of blood and flesh and bone splattered all over them. The kind of description of fighting in a battles that you often don't see from soldiers. And Rush had just witnessed that. And he was eager to prove himself. He got that opportunity at Fredericksburg. He did his part. I think he was somewhat amazed by the spectacle of war. He was absolutely taken by it. And yet he acknowledged and recognized its horrors. By the spring of 1863, he's starting to grow a little dissatisfied. General Robinson down there, he didn't have very kind things to say about him. He said Robinson liked to gamble a lot, and Robinson loved to gamble with the men. And of course that didn't sit well with Rush Caddy. He complained about discipline in the 97th New York. I looked at their regimental roll books at the National Archives. They didn't really have any serious problems from what I could tell. But Rush Caddy decided that it was time for him to transfer. He wanted that promotion. In the spring of '63, his men certainly didn't know it. He had applied to become an officer in USCT, United States Colored Troops. So he had put that application in as he's accompanying the Army into Maryland and then Pennsylvania. He is sickly. Again, he suffered bouts of diarrhea. He sent home, it's a really kind of amazing little letter, his recipe to contain or cure diarrhea that included morphine. A little bit of morphine in there as well. Do the body good, I guess. And so
I heard heroin works too.
Yes, that works as well. So he is sickly, but he is with the regiment as they make that advance on July 1st. He's on the back side of this ridge line when the skirmishers come over the wall. The regiment advance. They unleash a few volleys. And as Lewis has pointed out, along this line in a very spontaneous way, nobody should be able to take credit for what would be the counterattack in which Rush and his comrades surged over this wall. They raced down in that low ground below us. Immediately, The regiment got disorganized. It's pure chaos because there are so many North Carolina soldiers to capture as prisoners. In fact, the 97th PA or 97th New York captured more men than they had in their own regiment. And it's in the chaos down here that Rush Caddy is hit with a bullet. He's hit on the right side. And here's again all these little pieces of evidence that we can put together. If he gets hit on the right side, it undoubtedly is a bullet that's coming from O'Neill's men as well. He gets hit on the right side, he's knocked to the ground, he yells out that he's hit. Two privates take him on the back side of this ridge line, and they begin the journey across this old field, this open field, to a barn. I don't know where it's located, but it was just chock full of wounded soldiers. Rush told the two men that accompanied him off the field. He begged them to leave. He knew that the Union line was wavering, that it would disintegrate, and that they would likely be taken prisoners. So he was able to get them to leave. Confederates shortly thereafter surrounded that barn, and he's captured. He's given a parole pass immediately. Now on that parole pass, and I'm back to this Rush Caddy story will continue, but I'll end with this. On the parole pass, issued of course by Confederates, a parole pass in which Rush Caddy promised to not take up arms against the Confederacy until he was what? Exchanged. And on that parole pass, it was noted by the Confederate officer to not parole this man would be inhumane because he would suffer and would likely die and be no reason to take him on the retreat or to take him back to Virginia. So Rush Caddy, a man again who had great conviction and a great belief in the war itself. And one last thing, and I swear to God it'll be my last Gettysburg promotion. In 2013, we have a music conservatory. One of the faculty members wanted to write a piece to celebrate Gettysburg and the sesquicentennial. I gave him a bunch of letters, and some of the letters that he was able to use are the letters from Rush Caddy. One of those letters is actually from Rush's mother. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Rush lingered long enough to be able to get in touch with his mother. But this score, this musical piece that my colleague at Gettysburg College, that he wrote, that he composed, was performed by the Gettysburg College Choir. So what you need to do, and it's worth listening to, go to YouTube, put Rush Caddy, put Gettysburg College Choir, right, and it'll come up. And I had Rush as part of a book that I'm writing right now. I spent a number of days going back over his letters, thinking about Rush. And then I thought, I hadn't seen this in a while. And I got on YouTube and I watched it. It's extraordinarily powerful and moving. I don't think the Park Service would allow for it, but what I would do to be able to get our students right here to sing that piece would be, I think a fitting tribute to Rush and his sacrifice. There is, I should have also noted, a letter in here. I'm not going to have time to read it. It's worth reading. Lewis, I don't think I shared this with you. This is in Rush's private papers, and it's on page number 6. As you all probably know, family members wanted every detail, no matter how painful it might be, of their loved one's last moments on earth. Rush's parents wrote extensively to his comrades. Those comrades over time sent letters back to the family. This letter on page 6, in my estimation, is one of the best descriptions of the tactical fighting here. And that letter is dated September 7th, 1863. Again, what's powerful about it is one, I should have mentioned, is that Rush, during the fighting, all the men's cartridge boxes were open. He was cheering on his soldiers and taking the cartridges and ripping them open, obviously with his teeth, and placing them back into the cartridge box so that they could fire more quickly. And that's, of course, described in here. And then the attack itself and the turmoil and the chaos that occurred after that charge. So when you get a chance, you'll want to read this letter on page 6.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice letter. It's a common soldier. That's what it's about. All right, I'm going to read briefly. This is again from the History of the 97th, written by Captain Isaac Hall, Company A Commander. But he includes in here a statement by Lieutenant Colonel R.S. Eggleston. He was the part of the 97th Regiment, and this is furthering my hypothesis that Iverson attacks first, and then O'Neill does whatever he's going to do, whether it's a full-on attack or just skirmish a piece, you know. He writes, after the regiment in connection with the 11th Pennsylvania had reached Seminary Ridge, north of the cemetery and the railroad cut, it fronted north for a while, but pending the movement northerly of a skirmish line across a meadow, it changed front or flank to the east, forming on 1st Battalion. When he talks about their fronting north, that's when they're behind the fence. That is north. So they're fronting north, they are faced that way. And then they're going to turn back over here on this ridge. It said it changed front or flank to the east, forming on the 1st Battalion of the 12th Massachusetts, which had come up now. When the 11th and 97th changes their position this way, the 12th Massachusetts, again, that's the monument over here, looks like looks like a stubby pencil actually.
Yeah.
It's Daniel Webster's brigade. They come up and they're sort of facing this way, whereas these other two regiments are this way. So it's not a straight frontal line. And facing again northerly, marched along the easterly slope a short distance when it changed direction facing west. And marching up near the crest, halted 16 yards to the rear of where the 97th monument now stands. So he's saying there are 16 yards back behind you. And a desultory fire was kept up on this line till a charge of Iverson's brigade in our front. This charge was repulsed by a destructive fire of the 97th, a well-directed steady fire of a regiment or more on its left, to its left. That has to be Daniel's brigade, or the rest of, like Pete says, Iverson doesn't line up with their left on the Mummersburg Road and come this way. They come out, and they're coming this way. And then they start to pivot to the left, because if you read Daniel's report, when they pivot to the left, that takes Daniel by surprise. So Daniel then has to detach two of his regiments to link up with Iverson to protect his right, while the other regiments go towards that other railroad cut, the westernmost cut. They're going up against Stone Brigade. So this charge was repulsed by a destructive fire of the 97th, a well-directed steady fire of a regiment or more on its left, while the 12th Massachusetts poured a deadly fire on the enemy's flank. The 12th is going to move out and up, and they are going to fire this way into Iverson's flank. If O'Neill is attacking, they cannot do that. They have to watch their front and their right. Obviously, there's nothing going on there if they're allowed to flank Iverson. It says, which caused him to retreat and seek shelter in a gully about 150 yards to our front. That's out there in the middle of that field. From which he raised white emblems in a token of surrender. A charge by the 97th and a regiment or more on the left immediately followed, which resulted in the capture of about 400 prisoners. A skirmish line from an adjoining field on our right flank was kept up with galling effect on our line during our advance. This is what he just reported to. This is where Lieutenant Rush Caddy gets shot on his right arm. Also in returning, this fire was not relaxed on our left while bringing the prisoners from the field, some of whom were wounded by their own men. After the prisoners had been sent off the field, the 97th had rallied. An unsteady regiment just arrived on the easterly slope. It moved over the ridge and, supported by the troops, charged again in another part of Iverson's brigade, but met along lines of the enemy coming down upon them and were forced from the field, with many of the regiment killed, wounded, and captured. So they fall back after this charge. That's when Ramser's brigade comes into the action. By now, Jubal Early's arriving over there on Howard's right flank, and they write poorly about Howard's two divisions that come out. It's like, if you read their accounts and believe everything is right, Howard comes up, sees the lay of the land, like, yeah, this is not for me, and they immediately take off. We know they do more than that. The 45th New York is a big part of making sure O'Neill's brigade doesn't come too far, because they write that O'Neill writes that they're taking fire on their left flank. That's the 45th New York over there. So
I got three random things to say. If you all look to your right here, and we're not getting almost all of the brigade because we got the 97th here, but you all know Civil War combat at the tactical level was usually brigade against brigade. Usually, right? Sometimes it was more than that, but look at what we have in front of us. We have that rare opportunity to easily visualize the Federals, Baxter's brigade around that wall, and Iverson's brigade, right? So visually we can now sort of conceptualize that. That's unusual. Here's the other thing I want you to reflect upon. Think about all the people that come out here that don't have Lewis, right? And they stand and they look at these monuments and they probably think, why are they here? And what happened there? And there is nothing along this line that helps any visitor understand what happened there. It's in the last year, maybe even 6 months, where that blackish RV or bus looks very ominous, does it not? Like the bat bus, right? And right in that area is where there's a new Park Service wayside, and it's got some text, and it mentions Iverson's brigade. That's the first time. So I want you again to think about, everyone knows about Iverson's pits. I get it. I understand why it's enchanting and haunting and why people are drawn to it. But what's a damn shame is that nobody's really understood why this happened and who were these men that got sacrificed out here. And then finally I'll say this, actually two things. Like, you gotta think about this. We're used to this place, right? We know a lot of the history of this place. But if you don't, and it's your first time, that monument, it's the monument that dominates this landscape. And we know what the message was. It's a message of reunion. It's a message, as we all know, that was conveyed in 1938. We know there was probably 100,000 people out here. And we know that the celebration of American heroism, which we all should acknowledge, but we should also remind ourselves that what happened, that's the irony, right? There's your monument, and what happened here? Those Confederates were gunned down with impunity, right? And that should not surprise us. That's not castigating or criticizing either side. It is a brutal, bitter Civil War. So those stories that we know still resonate with Americans as to why this battle came. Oh, the Confederates, they were just on a little innocent jaunt because those poor boys, they didn't have any shoes. And that's why they came into Gettysburg, and, well, oops, then a massive battle erupted, right? Bedtime stories, man, that's what people like with their Civil War. You all don't. You're seasoned. You know this place. But remind also that the ground itself, there is a great, and it is a great book on the 1913 reunion. I wish I could remember the author's name. It's entitled 1913 Reunion, published in the last few years by Kent State. It is fantastic. It got great letters from the veterans themselves. One veteran who came here, 1913, said, man, the landscape here doesn't look like a battlefield anymore. Man, it's healed, and it's beautiful, bucolic. And what was his great worry? His great worry is that future generations that would come to this place, to this spot, they would take in this land and they would be overwhelmed by its nature, and that they would then see war strictly as adventure, heroism, bravery, courage. They would not get all the darkness of war. Fascinating, right? Again, we study this place, we know this place, we know the people who fought here, we know the ordeal that they went through. But for the average visitor here, there is a lot of work. Thank God they're here. It's just the beginning for them. But this is one seductive place. If you don't mind, I wouldn't mind reading the Berkeley quote real quickly. All right, and if you all could turn to page 14. I want to just make a quick reference. This is a William Robbins diary. I made a mistake on Matt's show. He probably won't have me back now. I said William Robbins was from North Carolina. He's not. He's from Alabama. I think he was in Law's brigade. He's a politician after the war. He was on the Battlefield Commission. That's page 14. Read this at your leisure. At the very bottom, Robbins, when he was working here, he would take veterans around the battlefield. He'd have interesting conversations with them. He'd go back and he would scribble into his diary. Often the entries are not as detailed as you and I would like, but he has an interesting one, and again at the very end of the page, when he talks about the survivors of Iverson's brigade pointed out, he said that they were devastated, I think the word he uses, annihilated by concentric fire. He talks about men with their white flags trying to surrender and all the confusion that persisted out there. It's worth taking a look at. I wish this diary, the Robbins diary, would get published. And now I want to finish with this. please. If you could turn just so you can see the title page. Page 10, 4 years in the Confederate Artillery. He was in the Hanover Battery. His name's Henry Berkeley. Henry Berkeley came probably on Oak Hill on July the 2nd, right? So the fighting obviously has moved on. And if you turn to page number 12, I'm just going to read you a brief quote. And if you don't want to read along, you should look out into that field. And as you look out into the field, you can imagine exactly what Berkeley wrote in his diary. This morning on getting up, I saw a sight which was perfectly sickening and heartrending in the extreme. It would have satiated the most bloodthirsty and cruel man on God's earth. There was, within a few feet of us, by actual count, 79 North Carolinians laying dead in a straight line. I stood on their right and looked down their line. It was perfectly dressed. 3 had fallen to the front, the rest had fallen backward, yet the feet of all these dead men were in a perfectly straight line. Great God, when will this horrid war stop? The regiment belonged to Iverson's brigade and had been pushed forward between 2 stone fences, behind which the Yanks were laying concealed. They had evidently been killed by 1 volley of musketry, and they had fallen in their tracks without a single struggle. These 79 North Carolinians were not the only dead on this hill. Many others were scattered around in a wheat field at the foot of the hill, and many were dead bluecoats. I turned from this sight with a sickened heart and tried to eat my breakfast, but had to return it to my haversack untouched. And I'll just note this, I think I'm right, Lewis, correct me if I'm wrong, when the Confederates begin their withdrawal, starting on the 4th, but I think I know Yule's men, they are camped here, right? And they comment about how overwhelming the smells are. They haven't buried the bodies yet. It is a gruesome place here, and they weren't able to take care of their own dead. Okay, go right ahead.
All right, real quick, running out of time. Time always flies out here. I wish my workday would fly this fast. I don't want my life to go by, though. It's flown by fast enough. This is from the 12th Massachusetts. Certain states do a pretty good job with record keeping. New York has a site that you can go on there and find the history of that have been written of all the regiments. You can find all the rosters. It's from a New York government site. But back in 1863, apparently the Massachusetts regiments had to submit some sort of paperwork back home to their state government. This is from the annual report of the Adjutant General of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts from December 31st, 1863, so the end of the year. And it's talking about what did these Massachusetts regiments do throughout this year. It's like they're wanting to account for what their men and material that they supplied, they got in their money's worth. So this is from the 12th Massachusetts report. And they read sort of like a battle, an OR, but a little different here and there. They write, arriving near the town of Gettysburg, we learned that the 1st and 3rd divisions were already engaged. After a few moments rest, awaiting orders. This wind plays havoc when you're trying to read. The 2nd Brigade advanced through the suburbs of the town, crossing the field, took position on the right of the line of the 1st Division, but forming a right angle with that line. Again, the 1st Division is Wadsworth, the end of the line is Cutler. If they form and he's talking about Baxter's Brigade, this is the right angle, 97th and 11th. But the 12th is moving up, and again, the 12th goes to the end, and they sort of come in at oblique. At this time, no enemy was visible in our immediate front except a line of skirmishers. On that dark map, you see the line of skirmishers out here. That's who they're talking about. Whose position behind a stone wall gave them an opportunity to annoy us considerably. They were handsomely dislodged by Company K. Captain Hazel, who deployed his company, moved forward at a double quick and drove them at the point of the bayonet. The enemy making a demonstration on our left flank. The 12th moves up. They're facing this way, but they're over there. Their left flank is this field, and over there on the other side of that ridge. The enemy making a demonstration on our left flank, the brigade rapidly changed front forward on its left, occupied the crest of the hill. We're talking about this ridge. And each regiment opening fire as soon as in position, the whole line was soon engaged. If O'Neill's men attack first, certainly they're going to run into the 12th Massachusetts, because by then the 97th and the 11th have changed front to face this way. The 12th moves to the end. They're sort of oblique. The O'Neills will come in on the right, but they talk about fire to their left, and they further change front to the left to confront Iverson's men. There's no mention of anything coming from the right. The position of the regiment was near the right between the 90th Pennsylvania and the 83rd New York. A second change of front by the regiment enabled it to deliver a destructive enfilading fire into the advancing lines of the enemy at short range, while the troops on its left received them with a steady and rapid fire. Again, that's Iverson. This soon brought the enemy to show the white flag and to cease their fire. The enemy were now observed bringing up heavy reinforcements against our front and advancing a brigade against our right, making another change of front of a part of the line necessary to prevent our right being turned. This was quickly and handsomely done by the two right regiments, the 90th Pennsylvania and the 12th Massachusetts. So I'm not going to go, you get the point. Iverson's men attack them first. They have enough time to change front to even move out and flank a portion of Iverson's brigade, and then they're going to change front again to the right because they sense a brigade building over here on Oak Hill somewhere threatening their right, and they're going to, together with the 90th Pennsylvania, push them back. So again, it's more evidence that O'Neill's men do not attack first. The 83rd New York, the 88th Pennsylvania are going to move up. They're going to extend the line. When Paul's men get here, that brigade is going to be broken up. They're not going to be one solid line. You're going to have the 104th New York and the 13th Massachusetts down that little hill over there. If you go down there and look at their flank markers, they're actually faced that way. They're faced due east. It's hard to imagine what it looked like. Trees get in your way. The left flank marker of the 13th Mass and the right of the 104th are in the woods. The little patch of trees, they shouldn't call them woods. So it's hard to see what they're seeing, but they're facing due east. They're not even facing up here. So that's the angle they come in. So they're over there when Paul's brigade, and then the 16th Maine, 107th PA, and 94th New York extend the line down here. They are on the left side of Baxter's brigade. So you have 3 regiments of Paul over here, 2 over here, and in the middle you have Baxter's brigade. The 16th Maine is over here. It's the tall monument. You got Sally right here, a white car, a monument, and then you got the tall obelisk, whatever you call it, Washington Monument. That's the 16th Maine. That's where they are, and I'm jumping ahead for time. Everything's going to start to fall apart. The 11th Corps gets flanked. I think probably for all the incrimination that the 11th Corps gets, and everybody's ragging on them, I think probably at the same time the other end of Doubleday's line is getting flanked by Abner Perrin's brigade. So the two ends start to fall apart. Everything sort of moves, crumbles towards the middle. We're in the middle, and then the middle is the last to fall. When it starts to break, Robinson's been ordered to get his men out of here. What he's going to do is order the 16th Michigan to move from over here, to move forward to the point, it's now at the end of Doubleday Avenue, you can see their advance marker, to move forward and hold on to the last man while the rest of these men get out of here. So the 16th Maine, everybody talks about Chamberlain, and that's fine over there. If only Jeff Daniels had played Colonel Tilton out here, more people would know about this other regiment and what they do. And that's the problem. Movies are good and bad for this. Gettysburg the movie got me into this. I got excited. I didn't know the Civil War happened. I was a big World War II guy. I can tell you anything about World War II, the Eastern Theater. European theater, excuse me. But I saw the movie, read Killer Angels. This is amazing. but then you latch on to those things because they're memorable in your mind. You've not only heard it and read about it, but you've got a visualization. They'd never let me into your college talking like this, would they? But you've got it visually in your mind now. It's actors playing people, but that sticks with you. You've got a picture with voice, and that's why people latch on to it. And I think Chamberlain does a fine job. But we got this other 16th Maine out here that's been told to sacrifice their men and hold to the last. Real quick, I want to move one more time. I don't know how many people go out to this marker, and there's some irony with that marker out there. So let's move down. You got anything else right here?
No, we'll finish off.
Caddy out there, yeah. We'll go down here. There's a path where those people are standing, and we'll go down. I didn't bring too many. One of the rare Confederate accounts that I brought out here. This was written to this was actually written from a soldier, Benjamin Robinson, Captain 5th North Carolina. He's part of Iverson's brigade. He's writing this letter to Zebulon Vance, the governor of North Carolina at the time. Governor Vance starts off the war he's part of the army, then becomes the governor. So he has a fine attachment to his North Carolina soldiers. He wrote this to Governor Vance on July 9th, 1863. July 24th, 1863, it was printed in the Daily Progress. That's a Raleigh, North Carolina newspaper. And this soldier writes, on the morning of the 1st of July, the brigade of General Iverson commenced its march from the camp near Heidlersburg in the direction of Gettysburg and was formed in line of battle. The 12th on the right, the 5th right center, 23rd left center, 20th left, about 2 miles from the town on the right, of which the corps of Lieutenant General A.P. Hill had already engaged the enemy. With Colonel O'Neill's Alabama Brigade on its left, it advanced in the direction of Gettysburg, covered by some sharpshooters. Moving forward in the letter, just then the brigade of Colonel O'Neill commenced to march forward. The brigade of Iverson on the right followed up the movement and advanced in the order already mentioned against the enemy, who was posted under thick cover of woods behind a stone fence immediately in our front. So what he is saying is they're moving at the same time. They can see O'Neill moving, and then Iverson's brigade comes out and moves. But then he writes, for some reason, O'Neill's brigade halted, but the brigade of General Iverson had advanced with such rapidity as to have no knowledge whatever of O'Neill's movements after he commenced the advance, and consequently attacked the enemy single-handedly in its front. So he acknowledges that he can see, and they're probably close enough, O'Neill's men move, but then for some reason he doesn't know, O'Neill's men stop. So when Iverson's men come forward, they are the only force coming forward against the Union line up here. I have to think, I know it's loud. I'm hard of hearing. You know, I used to be a jump master, so I flew on planes, jumping out of planes for some dumb reason. $110 extra a month when you're a staff sergeant in the mid-90s. That's a lot of money. But it's loud. And I wouldn't fly with ear protection when I had jump master duties because I got to be able to hear to put these people out, and then most of the time I'm going out with them. It's loud in the plane, but I could always hear other stuff in the plane along with the larger noise. My point is, when they're coming across and there's firing going on, if O'Neill's men are attacking, and this is just conjecture on my part, even though it's a loud, confusing din out here, this big mess, they would have been able to also hear fighting on their left. If O'Neill's got these 3 regiments they're attacking with, 1,000 men, close to 1,000 men. That's a lot of rifles. He'd have been able to not only see this attack, but hear it as well. And the only thing he has to say about O'Neill's brigade is they stop, and they don't go forth, and they don't attack with Iverson's brigade. So, if I haven't convinced you at this point, we got 10 minutes left. I think I'm not going to convince you today, but I've done my best. We've got to bring this to, we're not done yet. So, I got 10 minutes to fail, buddy. Give me time to fail before you clap for me. We'll wrap this up. You want to?
I'll say something about Russia finish that as well. But the other thing about Iverson and how disconnected he is from this attack, just not physically, but even in the moment, you all might know this. he saw all those bodies right in a straight row. What did he think? He thought they were out committing cowardice. He was infuriated by it. And it's one of the rare things I've never seen in another OR in which an officer backpedals from earlier comments. And at least Iverson, to his credit, in his official report, acknowledges that he had misjudged his men, that he had damned them of cowardice when in fact it was just the opposite as well. Yeah, let me just real quickly say something about Rush Caddy. At least initially he was well enough to get a telegram off. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. Back to his family near Rome, New York. He was moved from that barn to a house, and then I think he ended up in the seminary. I don't have proof of it, but the evidence suggests that's where he was when his mother arrived. And you all know that the idea of death in the Civil War is it would be an opportunity for that dying man to be able to express his love for his family, particularly for his mother, and to express his devotion to God and his commitment to nation. That was the idea, right? And we all know that death in the Civil War was hideous, it was instantaneous, it was cruel, and often then for those bodies who were left on the field, they never even got a Christian burial. But Rush Caddy, his final days here at Gettysburg, it actually conformed to that high idea, the good death in the Civil War. Not many men experienced it. His mother wrote about it, and this is a letter dated on July 23rd. I leave Rush in a few minutes to write, writing to her husband, by the way. I hardly know what to say. We moved him yesterday. He stood it as well as expected, but he is very miserable last night. His nerves all unstrung. You can have no idea how low and weak he is. We feed him wine and stimulants constantly. We're doing everything we can to make him almost as comfortable as he could be anywhere from home. But my heart aches so sometimes. We have no ice now. He said this morning, I want a piece of ice, as long as the end of my thumb. Oh, when we have it at home, so plenty. Still, we have lemonade. It's quite cool. He complains not a sound. So good to take his medicine. He said to me yesterday, kiss me, Mother. Pray for me. Said his mind had been dark and cloudy, but that the Lord had always been with him when he was sick. He talks very feeble. Oh, my husband, can we part with our dear, brave boy? May God give us the grace to bear all may be called upon to do. Pray for me and him, husband and mother and child, but may he live. We have still great hopes. Very next day, Rush Caddy passed. Again, because the Caddies were a family of money, they were able to put Rush's body in a casket. I believe it was like a metal casket, right? They were able to embalm his body as well, and they were able to send it back up to Rome, New York, where, of course, he had his funeral and his final resting place. We all lament the tragedy of the loss of these men on both sides, but what Rush's life has hit me particularly hard is getting to know him before the war, getting to know that he was a man of high idealism, getting to know that he was a man of conviction, and getting to know that he was a man that if he had lived, just think of all the good that he could have done in this earth. But to also know what, as we take in these monuments and what we forget far too often, he was a man who believed that the United States was an experiment in democracy, and it was a fragile experiment, and that the act of secession, that it was an immoral, and it was a threat. It was a threat to what the founders had bequeathed to this nation. And so though I lament, as we all do, the loss, a man 21 years old, man, he's the age of my college students. His young life gone, expired, and yet what? Rush Caddy would have not wanted it any other way.
Before I forget, I brought you out here. This is the advance mark of the 88th Pennsylvania. Their monument's directly behind you with the large bird on the top. They take part in the charge to capture a lot of these men. After the war, everybody heard of the National Tribunes, where a lot of these soldiers argue back and forth about various things. Because ultimately this is a Union victory, they can argue about this, it doesn't really matter point. Who captured these men? Captain Hall argues vehemently that it was the 97th that came out here and captured all these men. But I point, the 88th put a monument up. If I had any kids out here, when I got kids on tours, I say, how do we know Marcellus Jones shot the first shot to start the battle? He's got a monument up. If you do anything in this world and you want credit, you better get your monument up, because that's who we're going to talk about. You come out here, you talking about the 88th PA. You're not talking about the 97th. So, to wrap up our story, the 16th Maine again is pushed out over here. They're right where that vehicle just took off there. There's a small marker, their advance marker. They come out and they form an inverted V facing north. They are the last hope to hold these Confederates back, as the rest of these two brigades are going to make their way back through the town to Cemetery Hill. Eventually, though, they're going to get pushed off. They're going to fall back and they are going to go that way, and they are going to get to the area around Mary Thompson's house, the Lee's headquarters. Just north of that, in that woods, there's a railroad cut. And if you walk in there in the wintertime, there's some tablets back there also. That's a wintertime excursion. But that's where they're going to be. By then, you've got Confederates coming from the northwest, because everything's flowing back there. Most of those men are going to get captured over there. I think it's around 78% casualties. The vast majority of those casualties are going to be captured. To prevent their flags from being captured, they decided to tear apart the flags and have each man have a little bit of the flag. And that's how they prevent the Confederates from taking their flag. Yes, sir.
Was that capture mostly down there by the Thompson house, or was it up here?
Most of them, I think, get captured over there, because they're holding on a little bit here. I don't know how long they stay here. I think they stay here long enough to turn around and say, all right, there's nobody left, let's get out of here. But by the time they get over there, there's just so many Confederates around them. I mean, by then it's broke loose over there. Brockenbrough, Dorsey Pender's division is coming through, and that's where they get captured over there. So most of them get taken prisoner, and some of them do get wounded. If you look at how many actually get killed here, I mean, you know, each life is important, but it's not that many that die here for the 16th Maine. The vast majority get captured. But some of them do get wounded, and they get taken to various hospitals. One such person is a fellow named Albion Mills. This comes from 3 years in field hospitals of the Army of the Potomac by Anna. At the time, her name was Anna Morris Holstein. Published in 1867. She wrote, in the Union Tent, as it was called, standing alone in a rebel row, I found a boy of 17, 21, 17, wounded and sick unto death, whose wan, emaciated face and cheerful endurance of suffering at once enlisted my sympathy. He was the son of a clergyman in Maine, and in answer to inquiries about his wound told me, with feeling of evident pride, that early in the day his right leg was shattered and left upon Seminary Hill. Again, they think this is a hill they're on. Today we call it Oak Ridge, but this is where they're at. And then he falls back. You stand up there, Oak Ridge turns into Seminary Ridge, but they think all of this is one giant hill. And he carried to the rear that the stump was doing badly. He had enlisted simply because it was his duty to do so. Now he had no regret or fear, let the result be as it might. I wrote immediately, excuse me, don't tell your daughter I was out here crying. I wrote immediately to his home to tell him that he was sinking rapidly. My next briefly stated how very near his end was. There were but a few more of his gentle endurance, and the presentiment of the child we had so tenderly cared for proved true, when with murmured words of home and heaven his young life ebbed away. Another added to the many thousands given for their life of the nation. 1 week after his burial, his father came with a heart saddened with his great loss, and that his eldest son had fallen at Malvern Hill, the second with the army at Fernandina, and Albert, his youngest born, slept with the heroes who had made a worldwide fame at Gettysburg. They were his treasures, but he gave them freely for his country. She makes a mistake. His name is not Albert, it's Albion. Albion Mills was wounded. He had a right leg fracture. His leg was amputated. He died on 7 October at Letterman Hospital. He was buried the next day in the cemetery at Letterman Hospital, and then he was subsequently moved to the main plot of the National Soldiers Cemetery at Gettysburg. So he's over in the Soldiers National Cemetery. And I'm going to get through this, I promise you. One of the men with the 16th Maine, and he's the fellow that writes their history, Albert Small. He's an adjutant. He's a lieutenant, and he's the adjutant for the 16th Maine. He escapes here. Later on in the war, he gets captured, though, and he gets sent to a prison camp. But he survives the war. He's the one that writes their regimental history. But he also writes his memoirs. He has his diaries that have been published that you can read that are very good. He's the one that commented about Robinson's beard. The last statement in his memoirs are, though, and I read this, it tells you what a lot of these men thought about the war, the Union men. After so many years, it may be that I should erase the more or less bitter criticisms recorded in my captivity. But no, in prison I saw my fellow man, both friend and enemy, at his worst, selfishness and savagery. And I understand how Swift could call men the most pernicious race of little odious vermin that nature ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of the earth. Yet I remember too that I saw friends heroic and our enemies meriting our sincere tribute to their fighting qualities. I only wish that a war so hard fought could have been succeeded by an honest peace. The soldiers of both sides would, I think, have it so, but the politicians would not. There were those among the victors who would prey upon an honorably beaten and defenseless foe, and there were those among the vanquished who proved unwilling to abide by the arbitrament of arms which they themselves had invoked. Sometimes I wish I could forget it all, and again I rejoice that it is indelibly stamped into my being that my sons cannot but inherit, along with their father's loyalty, some of the conclusions of a life offered in the cause of making secure, lasting, and forever free the government under which we are living. Pete,
That's wonderful, Steve.
thanks for joining us out here today. I thank all of you for being out here today. It's been my honor and privilege.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. If I could just indulge you for a couple minutes, we want to get a group shot with the flag. It's a beautiful day, the field, yada, yada, yada. Are there any reenactors in the audience here? All right, would you guys come up here and help us line up as if we were